Will Japan use their nuclear option against the US? No, not that one. No, they're seriously discussing the other one because Trump has seriously upset and dishonoured them in recent weeks. I'm tired of other countries ripping off the United States. Oh, obviously that's Trump. But far from obvious is the fact that this was quoted in the 1980s on the Larry King show when he was promoting his book, The Art of the Deal. But in those good old days, China was still an agrarian peasant society with little in the way of industrialisation following years of dictatorship under Mao. His target was actually focused firmly on Japan back then, which had become the world's centre of industrialisation and technology. The label Made in Japan was on practically all electronics and photographic equipment, and they exported to the entire world. Well, today Japan is still a major force to be reckoned with. Canon, Sony, Nissan, Honda, obviously Toyota, which vies with VW for being the largest auto manufacturer in the world. Now, for a population of just 124 million, roughly 1/3 that of the United States, it's a massive exporter of all the things we need in a modern society. But steeped into this industrialisation is a strong link to the past, and a deep sense of honour. Trump has seriously upset the Japanese in recent weeks. Well, many economics professors at the top universities structure their classes to tackle the idea that a large trade deficit is bad for a country, which is a common view amongst new students. Getting rid of this notion is done in the first few days as the students learn there are other indicators that matters far more. Trump obviously missed this class. Well, in simple terms, a trade deficit is not an indicator of something wrong. I have a trade deficit with my hairdresser. I spend a lot of money with him every year, but he's never spent a single penny on my channel, so I'm in debt. On its own, trade deficit tells us very little. Now, no country can become totally self-reliant in every single product, and Japan saw gaps between American manufacturing and what their population actually wanted to buy. Cameras and cars are classic examples. Well, Legacy Auto were fixated at the time on massive cars with huge V8 petrol engines, which were immensely popular in the 50s, 60s and even into the 70s. And the US was fixated on the oil and gas industry. Well, just like the Japanese subsidised their domestic industries, still does to this day, so the US subsidised the gas and oil industry, still does to this day. Latest estimates suggest anywhere up to $500 million a year. But as time goes by with stagnant wages, inflation, rising petrol prices, the US buyers began to demand more economical cars, yet the manufacturers prefer to continue making these highly profitable monsters. Japan had always made more economical cars for the entire rest of the world. And then the Toyota Prius hybrid was a first and market leader at a time when Ford and GM still favoured the V8s. Japan from the 80s onwards began exporting their cars around the world, including to the US. And with the popularity over there, they set up factories in the US, as they did in Europe and here in the UK. Very successfully, as it turned out. And we in the UK and those in the US benefited from that arrangement. They filled a gap. Today, Toyota has massive manufacturing centres throughout the US and Canada and Mexico. The components are also manufactured all around the world to benefit from mass production, and that allowed their cars to be very competitive. But Trump, with his incorrect, simplistic view on trade deficit, bad, so slap on tariffs, has seriously upset the Japanese. They believe they've done nothing wrong. In fact, they've done more than many others, in fact any others, to actually manufacture in the States. They spent over $30 billion and employ more than 176,000 employees in the States, far outstripping others like Volkswagen. Yep, Trump has lumped them all together, and that's caused a major rift, not only in terms of trade, but in honesty and decency. The US has just lumped Toyota in with all the other countries, and their shock at this disrespect is huge. They face steel and aluminium 24% tariffs already, and although temporarily paused, they're not gone, they'll be back. Japan is a huge exporter of steel, includes about 1.1 million tonnes to the US, along with other metals, including aluminium. In fact, Japan is the second largest exporter of steel in the world. In addition, they do now have an extra 10% tariff on just about everything else. Well, Japan entered talks with Trump very early on, but no agreements have been made to date. Far from it. With all the chopping and changing of tariffs, Japan is starting to see the US and Trump specifically as untrustworthy, beginning to ask, even if a deal can be reached, will he honour it? One sticking point goes back to cars. Simple Trump wants Japan to buy more American cars, but, well, Japan's a nation that's tiny geographically, so they're not best suited to their roads. Plus, the Japanese people are largely loyal to their own car brands. This is a clash of society. Well, as always, a problem, the solution go very much deeper. America is the home of outright capitalism, where the full drive is on profitability at all costs. That includes being able to buy products and components from around the world whenever they're cheaper, and also to manufacture anywhere in the world where labour costs are lower. They followed that doctrine to the extreme, and for decades the US has been choosing to stop manufacturing products locally, thereby seeing their exports drop dramatically, along with losing loads of local jobs as they transfer that manufacturing to cheaper countries. It was not China in the early days that offered cheap factories and labour, but it was US and EU companies going over there and actually setting them up, financing them, equipping them with the latest robotic equipment and training the workers. That created the gaps in the marketplace that the likes of Toyota took over. But America funded all this on debt. Today they are massively in debt to the rest of the world. As a nation, they're not top, but they're heading there rapidly. Debt always lags far behind actions, and the recent global pandemic and subsequent supply chain issues, topped off by the world heading into a global slowdown with banking crises and inflation pressures, they're all leading to a serious problem for the US. That is made worse by the fact that the number one indebted country is Japan. When a sober lesson to the US and Trump, Japan was not always that way. 30 years ago, they had a GDP of only 50% compared to today's 240%. And that massive change was caused in the 90s and noughties by an aggressive policy of government spending and investment in infrastructure. But Japan's debt is largely held by Japanese banks, and the government honours those debts. They also make it less serious by being able to hold down interest rates, so the debt is much less of a burden. Over in the US, on the contrary, it's been selling its debt all around the world. Anyone could buy it, most people did. They saw that debt as a safe investment. Surely the US can never go bust. But Trump looks to have shot that argument down in flames. First, the huge majority of its debt is held by China and Japan. These two vie for first place, but they hold the majority. Oh, by the way, UK is third in line with well over $500 billion. While the UK still has its special relationship with the US, both China and Japan are being targeted as the world's bad boys, the ones Trump wants to bring crashing down. And Japan is the one that has mentioned the nuclear option. See, honour is a powerful thing. If Japan or China decided to retaliate by selling off their massive debt holdings, that would throw the world's financial markets into total chaos. It would send a real signal to all other investors that Japan no longer had total confidence in the US debt, and that could lead to a worldwide crash in the value of the US debt. Investors would simply no longer pay whatever prices they previously had. If there was any indication, some people didn't think they would always get their money back. That would lead to the US Treasury having to step in and support the debt, and might lead to them having to borrow even more money to buy the debt back. But who would lend them the money to buy it back? Debt that was no longer what it used to be. Classic catch-22. Well, in reality, others would buy the debt if it had a sufficiently high interest rate or return. See, money talks. So that would, in its own turn, increase the US debt. It's not good either way. But of course, for Japan, there's a risk. As the US Treasury increased the yield of the debt to make it more attractive, so money would flow to stocks and shares, leading to a cash crisis in US companies. See why they call it the nuclear option? It is a last resort, but with Japanese debt and their economic reliance on the US market, a last resort often ends up the only resort left. And we have seen that in Japan already when the US in 1940 cut off Japan's oil supplies. We all know how that one ended. Well, countries can be pushed so hard that they can see only one option open to them. America needs to tread carefully. Luckily, at the moment, Trump is in full retreat mode and not fully enforcing all that is already threatened. Most tariffs are actually on hold, so the crisis point is not yet here. But that hold only lasts 90 days, and those days are counting down rapidly. We have dangerous times ahead. The world auto industry is already suffering more than most. It is the most international of the industries. In fact, it was already suffering more than most before Trump got into power. This is the last thing that the world needs. Or bizarrely, what Trump wants is actually probably good for the world trade, good for the world economy. Just cannot be changed overnight. President Xi of China, Emperor Naruhito are both in there effectively for life, while Prime Minister Ishiba is the actual ruling power in Japan, like in the UK. The Emperor is not powerless. Donald Trump, meanwhile, is only there for a few years, and he needs the support of his Senate and House to actually achieve very much at all. He is the one with the most to lose, the one for whom the clock is ticking, and the one for whom protocol and diplomacy are foreign concepts. His lack of either and his absolute necessity to save face and look good to the whole world could threaten the entire world beyond anywhere it has ever gone before. I'm Dave.